shoveling leads in at the top anymore and getting people to respond out at the end. And that goes first, customers discover new solutions. They explore what solutions make sense for them to buy. They go through a purchase process, and then they engage with your company after the sale, and they repeat to explore new solutions. Today, if we go to the next slide, we're going to look at just that discovery phase of the customer life cycle and how both influencer marketing and advocate marketing can really help you reach new prospects, new customers who don't already know you're out there and aren't already familiar with you. But before we do that, we're going to look a bit bigger. And we're going to say, do we need to be doing this kind of thing at all? And do we need to be using social sources at all as a part of this process? Well, if we look at the data on the next slide, you'll see that 85% of B2B respondents, so B2B customers of companies like yours, are saying that at least one social source is important to them as they make their purchase decisions, as they decide what to buy, as they research what's the right fit for their needs. And the sources aren't the mass market social sources that you'd expect. It's really focused on specific forums, specific videos, specific pieces of content that are really central to their business challenges. As we move on, we see that we can also add people to this. And we look at what's not important and building up from the bottom. LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter aren't the answer to your social marketing challenges. Yes, we want to, as B2B companies, be doing marketing on those channels. You want to be reaching your customers across all channels. But if you keep looking at who matters, and your peers and your colleagues as a business decision maker are the people who make the difference. And influencer and advocate marketing are getting those peers and colleagues to speak on your behalf. At the same time, looking at two other groups of people here, your vendor salespeople, consultants, and systems integrators, so both the people who sell your products for your company and the people who sell your products and don't work directly for you, are also critically important to building that story of what's out there and how can your business help people make decisions. If we transition for a moment to look at the consumer side of this business, you'll see a very similar story that I won't spend nearly as much time on today, where friends and family are still the #1 source for finding out about new brands, products, and services during the discovery phase of the customer life cycle. Of course, there are plenty of other sources that matter. Traditional advertising still has a very, very important role, and we can't dispute or dismiss the importance of good advertising, good search marketing. But you gotta pay attention to what people's friends and families are saying about your products. Next, how does this roll up together into a social marketing strategy? Well, we can layer that customer life cycle with a social for each part of that customer life cycle that we call a model radar, standing for reach, depth, and relationship. And that piece of social reach is what you do during the discovery phase of the customer life cycle. And we're going to get a lot more into that today. The other two parts for reference are social depth, which is social used during the explore and buy phase, adding social elements to your own website and building a social hub on your own site, and social relationship, which is social marketing centered around people who have already bought from you and figuring out how to really work with them and strengthen your relationship with them. So let's talk about just that social reach. If we keep going, social reach focuses on, as we said, discovery and new prospects. And it's not about a delineation between paid marketing and free marketing, if we keep going. It's about both. And we can't lay out a story today where we talk about advocate marketing in isolation, separate from the rest of our discovery marketing. And we can't talk about it separate from other elements of social reach, because all your content is a mix of both. The best things your advocates say are going to be promoted throughout your social channels and are going to be shared by your advocates because they're great pieces of content. Whereas on the flip side, the best things your advocates say, you're going to want to put paid marketing dollars behind and help reach a broader audience. So what does social reach look like? Well, there are, don't know what that was. There are 4 main types of social reach that we want to pay attention to in terms of who created the content and how impartial they feel to the market. First, there are people who you work with yourself. They are the people on your team, people listening to this call, they're your marketing team, and you can control 100% what they say. It's 100% your content about you, totally straightforward. Then there are people who have a much more independent voice, but they're still in business with you. They're your employees. They're the product manager who's writing a blog about cool new uses of your product. They're your resellers and channel partners who are talking about implementation details on a whole host of social networks. Then there's your customer advocates and your customers and your advocates. And these people aren't automatically going to say only positive things about you, and you can't control exactly what message they're saying, but they are certainly really going to broadcast important content about your products. And then finally, there's category influencers who are going to be doing a really great thought leadership type work, but they're only sometimes going to be talking about you as opposed to your space, and they're only sometimes going to be saying positive things about you. Then across the other axis, it's a question of how much is your audience going to actually trust this piece of content. And not all content from all sources are trusted and treated the same by your audience. So for example, if I do the simplest form of social reach marketing, which is I'm going to buy a whole bunch of Facebook ads. Yes, they're going to be exactly on message. Yes, they're going to actually reach a very large audience, and exactly the right audience if I target correctly. But it's not going to be very trusted content. Completely in the other direction, if I note that a category influencer is writing a series of blog posts about my products, they're going to be very influential, they're going to be very well trusted and well believed, but they're certainly not going to particularly be on my message. And you'll note that this isn't a right or wrong question. All great social reach is a mix of multiple different elements on this chart. But today we're going to focus, if we build out once, on customer activation, socialized customer advocacy, and also the type of advocate marketing involving our resellers and our channel partners, because they're also very strong advocates of our brand. And we're going to be paying attention to this group because this is a group that often produces very trusted content that doesn't feel like it's coming directly from our marketing team, but also we can be pretty confident they're going to be saying positive things about us, and they're going to be really defending our reputation and our messaging to the broader market. I get a lot on the next slide when I do this, people saying, well, how do I lay this out as a real-world example? Well, step one, think of social advertising as something like this ad from Cisco, where they just had a great piece of content. They're going to promote it to people who are interested in security and networking. And on some levels, it's an ad. It's a very effective ad. It's an ad that is going to reach exactly the right people, but it's not very interactive other than you can, obviously, someone retweeted this example. Whereas our second category is working with someone like evilrouters.com, a blog run by Jeremy Gaddis, who calls himself a network ninja and has certifications from a number of different router partners, not just Cisco. He also does business with Microsoft. He does business with VMware. And we want to treat him as an important influencer, but he's certainly, even just by the title of his blog, going to be more than willing to trash what we're doing and say, you know what, Cisco's making mistakes here, and I think you should go with VMware for the day. And then the third category is going to be a blog like hackingcisco.com run by Jared Reck, who is a full-time Cisco trainer and researcher and does most of his business and professional work involving Cisco routers and Cisco servers, and he's a very powerful advocate of Cisco. He writes about them all the time. He does lots and lots of business related to them, but he's not actually an employee of yours. He's certainly not in marketing for you. He's just someone who really likes your products or really does a lot of business with your products. And those are important distinctions, and we're going to be spending our time today primarily focused on that advocate marketing portion. So I also hear a lot, isn't this just our customer intelligence initiative or our social intelligence initiative? Well, it's not. Your social intelligence initiative isn't designed for engagement, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's an important part of your social marketing mix. But social intelligence or anything involving listening is really designed to tell me what's happening, not designed to tell me exactly how to respond to it or really help me engage with that content. And listening platforms aren't designed that way. If we take a look at the data around listening platforms, and we asked marketers who are doing social listening, why do you do it? What are you looking for? Well, the number one and number two thing here is market research and brand tracking. And that makes sense. It's a listening platform. It's designed for those functions. Whereas the things we're talking about today involving influencer marketing or lead generation are not really the point of a traditional listening platform. And we'll see that a number of platforms are starting to shift their focus to become more of influencer advocate marketing platforms. But that's not a primary goal of that function. And we really want to pay attention to how do we actually have conversations and build rich relationships with these people, not just use them for market research or brand tracking. I'll also point out that listening platforms often amplify the wrong thing, where 2/3 of your average content on Radian 6 comes directly out of Twitter, and that's a number that is fairly consistent across most different listening platforms. Whereas from the previous data, you saw me say that only 5% of your buyers are influenced by content on Twitter. That's why when you look at advocate marketing as a discipline and influencer marketing as a discipline, you need to really focus on how to actually get these people not just to talk on the large public social networks where it's often easier to pay attention or easier to talk, but also on their own blogs, on private social networks, and on specific pieces of social sites like my previous examples with Cisco that aren't major jumping off points that are going to ring bells to mass audiences, but instead are highly relevant to a very narrow and very specific audience that is your prospects and where they spend their time. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark, the CEO of Influitive, for a moment to talk about exactly where do we find these advocates and who are they?
Thanks so much, Zach. And that's really exciting research and very compelling data that you shared. First, before getting into that, who are these advocates? The way that we look at advocates here is really any individuals that invest in companies, in your company, in non-financial ways. They can be customers, they can be partners, they're fans and evangelists also because they're potentially our employees, shareholders, really anybody that invests in your company, they're not necessarily buying something. They're contributing in non-financial ways. And it's not just that they're talking about you. It really is their overall contribution. So things like co-creation, co-selling, co-marketing are really all part of advocacy as we see it. So why do they do this? Well, these people identify with the companies and the products that they love. For example, you can see here the Ectronauts. Just absolutely love this photo. And you can see here with these folks that they've hand-carved a sign, the Ectronaut sign. They clearly identify very much with the company Ectron that they're a part of. And I think that this sense of identity is really crucial to understanding what motivates advocates. So where do you find them on the next slide? As I mentioned before, they're not just customers, right? So you find them all over the place, and as advisory board members or as a beta tester, your sales references, people who have finished tweeting. I mean, folks that have just finished deploying, they may not have even experienced the value that you created for them, but they're so excited that typically you'll get a big peak of advocacy in that period just before they sign a contract to just after that time of deployment, where at that point their expectations are limitless in terms of what they think that you can do for you. So it is a really interesting stakeholder class. I mean, think about some of the ex-customers you've had that have moved on to new companies, right? And how often those are the best sources of leads for B2B. And that's invariably true. Some of the best leads that most B2B companies have are their former customers who move on. And to give you a real mind bender, what about those people who used to use your product and now use a competitor's product and don't really like it? Right? So you can have even people who use your competitor product that can be very powerful advocates for you. In fact, maybe the most powerful advocates are those folks that use another product and they wish they were using your product. So what makes advocates tick? What motivates these people? So I've got a background in neuroscience. I've got an aborted PhD in the area. So for me, it really, whenever I think about this, I often come back to fundamental principles of neuroscience and psychology. And I think that is so useful for understanding if you really want to maximize your ability to motivate advocates. So people have a real clear sense of long-term best interest. Doesn't mean they always act in their best interest, but generally have a pretty clear sense of what is in their best interest. And because humans are social animals, a lot of this self-interest is tied to their success in a social group. Right? If you think about it, we are social creatures. And so we think about, for example, recognition and status. Right? I mean, that's a fundamental part about being a human being. Actually, it's even a fundamental part of being a gorilla or a lot of other kinds of animals. Right? Think about a silverback gorilla and the status that the alpha male has in a group. Think about human females often in the sense of fashion that comes and goes. Their ability to want to show that they're distinct from the group. So the ability to generate status and recognition is very important to being successful in a group. And so you want to provide that for people. And advocates especially, it's a big reason why they advocate. It's a chance to get recognition and status. Or let's look at reciprocity. I mean, there is a distinct center in the brain in the orbitofrontal cortex that lights up when presented with issues of reciprocity. Right? So if you are provided with a token of some sort, you're most likely really compelled to want to do something in return. That's called the principle of reciprocity, a very well studied principle of psychology. So as human beings, it's really valuable to be collecting favors because you never know when you might have to cash those favors in. So very much true for why people advocate. It's a way for them to collect favors that they may need to cash in one day. Or let's look at loyalty, right? So again, being a social animal, we as human beings want to build the in-group, build that posse, that team. So advocating is a way to go and build that team and to build up that army. Validation, feedback, fundamental component of being a human being is we want feedback and validation on how we're doing. So a lot of, again, that's another thing you want to do in your advocacy programs is provide that feedback for folks. And fifth, a sense of fulfillment, a sense of self-actualization. Right? It feels so amazing to be part of a movement that's bigger than yourself. And I think that's, again, a big reason why people advocate for companies and brands that they love. And that's because it provides them a sense that they are part of a movement and a sense of fulfillment that they get from that. So I'd like to turn it back over to Zach now to talk about what's next.
So let's start by saying I 100% agree with what Mark's saying here. It's not about just customer advocacy or just talking to your customers. It's about figuring out who are going to be the best advocates for your brand and for your business and really working with them. I want to point out you don't treat all of your customers and prospects as equals, and there's no reason you need to treat everyone who talks about your product and your category as equals either. Instead, we want to really focus in on who are the advocates who not only are speaking about me the most positively, but also have a real influential voice and are really saying things that other people are listening to. I can be someone who loves your product, but if I am only talking in my own head or not speaking publicly at all, I'm probably not the most interesting advocate for you. And the inverse is also true. I can be a huge influencer, but if I'm not a fan of your product or willing to say so, I'm not a great fit for your advocate marketing program either. So keeping going, why should you focus on advocate marketing, and why should you do this? Well, step one, your customers are already talking all the time. You are not magically saying, if I start a program like this, I am going to create discussion where there was none before, and all of a sudden there's going to be conversations happening about my product and there never were before. That's just kind of a silly overstatement, where the reality is your customers are going to be either promoting you or slamming you to their peers and their colleagues every day, regardless of whether or not you do anything at all about advocate marketing. However, if you do something here, their engagement, if we keep building, will fuel the fire. And it will get them to hopefully say more things about you, say things about you more publicly, and say things about you in a more positive light. Let me also point out, third, that engaged advocate programs supplement your customer reference programs or customer advocate programs that you already have. Where you already have today core special groups of customers who use as reference customers and help close your big deals, well, you know that doesn't scale. Those people are incredibly busy. You go to the well too often with any given advocate. They say, why do I have to have yet another one of these conversations? I'm done. Take me off your list. But if you can get that person to, instead of saying, okay, I'll do one more reference call for you, I'll write a blog post for you, you can cite that blog post hundreds, thousands of times, and instead of burning out your best customers, you excite them, because those best customers now get to be thought of as thought leaders and get to be getting their own voice out there as a trusted advisor in the space, and that's really valuable to them. I also get the question a lot, what's the difference between an advocate and an influencer? And how do I actually draw the line here? Well, if we take a look at the same graphic I had up a few minutes ago, and just look at column 1, the category influencers, and column 2, the customers and advocates. Well, building this out, you need to work with both, but advocates advocate for your brand. We know that those influencers sometimes speak positively about us, and sometimes they recommend our competitors' products entirely. We today are going to be just thinking about those people who are we know happy with our brand and are going to actually probably push back against the category influencers when they say, oh, I think this is a terrible solution. Your best advocates will say, oh no, it's not only will they stay silent, they'll respond to that blog in comments, they'll write up their own reviews and their own feedback and help produce a positive voice for you across the social web. Mark's going to show a couple of specific examples of what this looks like, but that's the fundamental difference we're drawing out today.
Yeah, that's great, Zach. I think so on point. Both advocates and influencers are important. I think companies need to really think about both. And they are so synergistic if you really consider both of these groups and figure out how they work well together. So let me give you an example. Here's a fun one of how advocates and influencers commingle, how advocates can influence the influencers. So one of our customers, BrainShark, are really fabulous advocate marketers. And they have a product which I think everybody who has an iPad has got to use this app. It's a fantastic app for showing PowerPoint slides really beautifully and effectively on an iPad. And there was a question on the Quora site, it's a Q&A site, on what is the best way to view PowerPoint presentations on the iPad. Absolutely the best way to view PowerPoint presentations on the iPad is SlideShark, which you get from slideshark.com. And there was kind of this dormant Quora question on it. And I think most of the time what you'll see on Quora is that the people who really jump on this would be the marketers. And somebody from the marketing department or even sometimes a sales rep, would jump on this and would say, hey, me, right? This is really, you should use my product. But this is not what Brainshark does, nor any companies that are really good at advocate marketing. Their instinct is to get that army of advocates to go and answer that, because advocates really are on your team and they're up to the job. So let's see how amazing this is. You look at the results. Within hours, we had 8 advocate responses, but that's not all. The really cool thing about this, right, is that there's a viral effect. You get sharing, you get voting up, you get commenting, right? So there's 24 total responses on the 8 advocate responses. So all of a sudden you took this thing which is dormant to something which is being very, very active. And what Google does when it sees stuff like this is that Google loves this, right? It brings it up to the top of the stack. So if you search on questions like how to best view PowerPoint presentations on iPad, you'll find that this is really high up on Google. So you wonder, does this sort of thing affect downloads and sales of SlideShark? I mean, absolutely. Now, one person here happens to be a very influential blogger, a very influential person, and that person is Gitesh. So Gitesh now is one of the people who picked this up in the Quora blog, and so as a result, he does an interview with the head of product for Brainshark. So this is really, really important. So what the influencer here does is add some intellectual heft. Right? This is not just an ordinary person, an ordinary partisan. We're going to talk about intellectuals and partisans in just a few minutes, right? But this person who's an expert in the area is very influential, helps advocates believe, and so this way we've got advocates that have influenced the influencer, but that same influencer now influences the advocates back by providing frameworks around how to think, in this case, about presentations on an iPad. So you really get this working in a positive feedback kind of cycle. Advocates influence influencers, which again influence advocates. Let's go to another example, and this is actually from our own company. And so we also want to be able to influence influencers. In our space, these are companies like Forrester Research that are very influential among our buyers. We seek to influence really all the key analyst firms out there. So here's how we do advocate influencer marketing at Influitive. So we saw this particular post, looking for advocacy program information. So our first instinct was not to answer this post ourselves, right? Because we are not as impartial and as trusted as our advocates are. So we wrote this particular challenge, right? So research director at XYZ analyst firm wants to speak to you. We issued out this challenge to our advocate base, and let's just see what happened. As a result, we had a number of our advocates from these fine firms here at Demandbase, Eloqua, and McAfee writing these really well-written, well-thought-out responses to the analyst query. And I think that's one of the key things about B2B. It's different from B2C. It's not just about total numbers. Quality is really important, right? And that's one of the things that advocates can do for you, is provide really high-quality, reasoned responses. The second thing that they do is they do it fast. There's a speed element to advocates. Again, they identify with your brand, they defend your brand and your company, and so they get out there really fast with these highly relevant and well thought out types of responses. So I'll turn it back over to Zach now.
Great, thanks a lot, and I love those examples. And kind of as a transition back here, I wanted to put up this slide of Tahrir Square in Egypt and the revolution that occurred there recently and say, really, who's this about? This photo was really powerful to me because it's not about the speaker. It's not about the person on the stage in a branded sense. It's not about your brand and your VP of marketing who would like to control the conversation. It's about her empowering the tens of thousands of people in the square, in the crowd, who have something powerful to say and believe in your message or believe in your cause. And it's about her helping single out the people in the audience who are going to be the strongest voices for what your message is and helping them get their voices heard, as opposed to just pushing a single message and a single word across all of the people who might be your advocates. And one note as we move past this slide, that's exactly what was going on here, in that in Tahrir Square, 29 people had just been arrested the night before and had just been let out. And this woman was a political figure in Egypt at the time who was talking about their sacrifices and their place in the history. And these tens of thousands of people are all going to be part of that vision and part of those next steps. And obviously, don't want to trivialize here anything. You're not going to have true revolutionaries on your behalf, but you are going to have people who have a strong belief in your products and services and are willing to speak up and defend your offerings as powerful.
Yeah, Zach, I think that's such a powerful example, and I think of it in a similar way. Every revolution needs both intellectuals and partisans. And I kind of think of the intellectuals being like influencers and partisans being like your advocates. So if you think about the American Revolution, often the image that comes to mind is the Boston Tea Party. But before that was a lot of very powerful philosophy that was written by intellectuals like Thomas Paine in this example. And it's so important to have these intellectuals, these influencers, because they provide a framework to help the partisans truly believe. It gives them the motivation. It stokes the revolutionary spirit. It stokes the fire, for these folks. Without these intellectuals or influencers, you're not going to have as powerful a response from your advocates or partisans. It's going to peter out. And you know what? That partisan energy also influences the influencer, right? I mean, how often do you see that, as a movement starts to really take shape, that those intellectuals they get picked up in it, right? And they get swept up in the revolutionary fervor and radicalizing them further. This isn't just true in the political sense. I mean, this is true in business too. I mean, think about Linus Torvalds and Linux, right? He provided the intellectual framework. He provided the software. But then there's the legions, the millions of software developers that believed in the vision, that believed in the framework that was provided by Torvalds, and really catalyzed a revolution in the way that software is created. I mean, it's one of really hundreds of examples that I could have chosen on this.
So
Exactly.
really, we also need to think about what's the right way of motivating these advocates. We've already established they're there and that they're important, but when we ask advocates or just customers in general, when you have an online community managed by a vendor, what encourages you to participate in it? And this is obviously data focused on online communities, but I think it really resonates to participation in an advocacy program as well. Well, we can say these things are the ones that you really want to be spending your time. Things involving ideation, VIP treatment at an event, and personal contact by the vendor representative. Whereas at the other hand, you also got people saying discounts on a vendor's products, gift certificates, and cash. And we really want to focus instead on these things in green right now, not the things that are going to come up in red. Not because they're necessarily more or less powerful, but these are the things that help build tighter relationships and tighter value between your advocates and your brand. When you get into things involving pay for performance, either discounts for the company on products or gift certificates, you're going to get into a cycle that's not nearly as healthy for your brand as if you're treating these people as trusted partners of the brand and people who are going to be engaged in a two-way relationship to make a better experience for everyone. And that better experience is what you're going to be spending the most of your time on when it comes to incentives.
Yeah, that's a great point, Zach. And we look at it the same way. So, our framework, how we think about reward and recognition, we encourage all of our listeners here who are building advocate programs or managing them to think about capital, not cash. Think about social capital, right? It goes again back to psychology and why it is that advocates do what they do. They are looking for recognition. They are looking for status. They're looking for a chance to be all they can be. So the way to really motivate them is to activate all of those soft factors. So first, we see you. We recognize you, right? So we provide some tokens of recognition. So these, this is not payola. It's not buying them off. It's just a way, a token to say, hey, we understand what you're doing and we really appreciate what it is that we're doing. You're providing feedback, positive feedback to advocates that they're doing something really valuable for you and that you appreciate it. The next level, we're really listening to you, right? So a number of our customers have built their executive sponsor programs on the advocate program. So, when advocates are really moving up the ranks, when they're really helping out in a deep way, then, for example, you can get a C-level person as an executive sponsor to really listen to concerns, leapfrog over the call center as an example. It's a great way to show that you recognize advocates for all the special things that they're doing for the investment, that they're the non-financial investment that you're doing in their company. And that their voice is also really powerful and you want to hear it. You really want to extend the four walls of your company around your advocates and get their feedback on everything from the way your products are built, the way your services are designed, your marketing campaigns, the way your products are named. You name it, advocates have feedback for you, and they love it when you consult them, and often they can provide some pretty amazing contributions. And finally, and most important, is we're behind you. We're in this together, right? Us, the company, and the advocates together. Advocates are looking for more recognition and social capital. Why don't we help give them that? Let's give them what they want. Let's connect advocates to the people that they want to meet, both inside your company and outside of your company, right? Let's give them the kind of online social recognition, whether it's cloud or any of those kinds of stuff. Let's give them that kind of portable influence, so to speak, that really help them be more effective in their life. So Zach, let's turn it over to you on how to get started.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Let's start with some real basics here as we keep going, which is step one. When you do this, I don't want you to say, I need to create something out of whole hog. I need to start a whole new initiative that doesn't exist already. You're already working with your existing customer references and running a customer reference program in all likelihood, and if not, you probably should be. And you're already having conversations with your advocates on a regular basis. Just start there and work to see, can I make those references and can I make those advocates more influential in their own circles, and can I support them to talk about me more publicly as opposed to in one-on-one interactions. And then second, you need to make those advocates special and put their needs first. They have no interest in just blindly parroting your company line. They have interest in, as Mark was just describing, things that make them special and make them into the expert. And by supporting their needs and helping them be their own influencers from being advocates, you're going to make them much more excited to work with you. And then finally, this isn't something where I'm telling you to do this in a vacuum. Track your results. Even if today the measurement part of this is going to be a very rough and very early story, you need to be at least tracking exactly how many people you're working with in this type of program and exactly how often they're speaking about you publicly, what they're saying, and what kind of reach those opinions are getting. And we're going to, down the road, suggest you move from that high-level kind of superficial counting game tracking to much more results-oriented and ROI-oriented tracking, but at least start there to begin with and advance as you grow your program.
Great, Zach. So just one more slide before we get into the Q&A and then into the backstage pass. So 5 tips for building advocate engagement. Number one, hopefully we haven't beaten this to death, but always focus on the relationship. Advocacy is not transactional. So yes, you've got case study quotas to hit this month, and you have got referral leads that you need to be able to generate. But I would implore the listeners here to focus less on that, less on the golden eggs, so to speak, but more on the geese that lay those eggs in the first place, the advocates. Focus on them. Focus on giving them what they want. If you're going to go and track some metrics on that, how about tracking the number of new rockstar advocates that we have grown this quarter, and the velocity of how we've grown them, as opposed to, hey, we've hit our case study quota. So if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's that one. Secondly, again, build the advocate's reputation. So part of focusing on the advocate is giving the advocate what it is that he or she wants, right? So while you might think, I need references to help close deals, they're thinking about connections. They're thinking about the people that they want to meet. When you're thinking about, I need more referral leads, they're thinking more about trust, and how they can build greater trust in with your company and help other people trust your company more. You're looking for more people to help on analyst calls. They're looking at enhancing your reputation and status, right? So help build those things. Third, start small, work towards big asks. Okay, so one of the things that, for example, I've always found frustrating. I sign a deal with a vendor and they stick in the contract. You must do a press release with us. It's too early for that. I'm not ready, right? So you don't ask somebody to get married when you first meet them in a bar. You start small, work towards big asks, lead them down a garden path, right? So start with some small asks around, maybe some things around social media, and following on Twitter, liking on Facebook, and quick feedback, quick ratings. Get them into the spirit of advocating for you before you make the big asks. A well-designed advocate program should do that. Fourth, use psychological principles of motivation. Right? So we talked about psychology. So think about exclusivity. People love to be part of an exclusive club, right? People are hardwired to seek scarce things, right? So make your advocate program scarce. Make it exclusive. Provide a sense of reciprocity. Do things for your advocates that make them want to do things back for you. Get psychology working for you. And fifth, and I think very importantly, is make it fun. A lot of people don't think of reference programs as being fun. Maybe that's one of the things that distinguishes advocate programs. They should be fun. Entertainment is a fundamental human need. Right? Provide a diversion for people from the drudgery of their daily life by making advocating for you an entertaining and enriching experience. And I think what you're going to find is that you're going to get a lot more activity from the same people that advocate for you today by doing some of those things.
Great. Well, Mark, Zach, thank you very much for the presentation, the walkthrough of the slides. This is Jim Williams, again, the VP of Marketing here at Influitive. And I think we have some time for some questions before we head backstage. And there's been a few that's come in here that I think would be good to start off with. And the first one, Zach, really, I'd love for you to address this question, and then Mark, you can chime in as well. But a question I have here is, do you feel that with the rise of social media, that the influence of traditional authorities like analysts, pundits, media has declined? And if so, is that a one-time thing we're seeing, or is this a permanent change?
I think it's a great question, and I will say I've certainly quipped in presentations like this before, contrasting someone like me, who is obviously a traditional industry influencer, with advocates or new generations of influencers. And it really boils down to the number of people who can be influencing the sales cycle, who someone doesn't know personally, just continues to get larger. It used to be you only had a choice of a very select number of sources for information, and it might be analyst influencers, Or it might be a single newspaper and your town only had a single news source, and if you didn't like what, in my case, the San Francisco Chronicle had to say that day, well, that's all the news you're going to get. Well, today it's a much broader answer, and if you don't like the Chronicle, you can go read your favorite newspaper that's published daily in India. If you don't like an analyst's view on an area, you can look at a much broader range of solutions. And that broadening of expertise is what's growing. It doesn't necessarily mean that the traditional influencers are going away. As a matter of fact, it certainly does not mean that. But instead it means that the traditional influencers themselves are getting information in from more sources, and your buyers are also getting information in from more sources.
Yeah, that I agree totally. I like to chime in here. I think what's happening is it just polarizes the situation. So I think what's happening with the rise of social media is that the mediocre journalists and analysts are just becoming irrelevant, and the analysts that really know what they're talking about, that have done great research, have the data, have the facts, have the best frameworks, are the ones that people are really gravitating towards. And I think that their influence is actually increasing, right? And it's increasing because, you know, advocates out there are voting for them, and social media is providing greater opportunity for them to vote, right? So, which I think this is a great thing, right? Is that the truly competent folks that are in the influencer sphere, the analysts and journalists, are actually getting more attention. I think the other thing too is that you've got some advocates that are more compelling than others, because there are some advocates that are just kind of, maybe consider them almost like raw muscle, right? They just love to, they make a lot of noise out there. And then there's some other advocates that, you know, while they might not have deep training, they really do know what they're talking about. And so some of those advocates actually end up becoming like quasi influencers in their own right. So yeah, quite interesting in terms of what's happening with social media and how it affects the space.
Thanks, Mark. There's another question in here for you. I think you could lead off here. Is we brought up motivation of advocates, and the question says, how do you reward advocates without it becoming a pay-to-play type of situation or running afoul of regulations? How do you walk that line if you want to build an advocate marketing program and recognize your advocates?
Yeah, you know, again, a great question, one that we get asked a lot, you know, and again, I'd use that framework of capital, not cash, right? So, you know, I think that a lot of those tokens you provide really should be a token, right? It's just a token appreciation. You really don't want to be buying off or have a perception of being buying off an advocate. I mean, not only is it unseemly, but it doesn't actually work. You know, human beings have two very different pathways in their brain for motivation, one where they're being paid and one where they're doing it for fun. So you really want to be activating that latter you know, pathway by providing the right kinds of you know, of recognition. In the case of some of our customers, we have things like donations to charity, which is a great one, right? A great way to provide social capital for people, right? By recognizing their favorite nonprofit type of organization is a great way to do it. Another one that works really well is when the advocate has a chance to bestow some training or learning or enriching opportunities for their people. Again, people advocate because they want a greater sense of esteem. So why not increase that even further, you know, by providing these sorts of opportunities? And those are, you know, very, those don't really run afoul of any regulations there. Yeah, leave it at that.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question here. Zach, this is a good one for you to lead off. How does a marketer, and specifically B2B marketer, actually measure influence? And then there's a kind of follow-on questions. How do you define influence versus reach? And what are the strengths and weaknesses of some social score tools like Cloud and Cred? Zach, you there? Might have
Sorry about
lost you.
that. I love the question, and I think it's a both very important question and one I get quite often. It's not about, to start out with what it's not about a single cred score, a single clout score, a single number you can stamp on someone's forehead and say, there you go, he's a 62 influence, I'm done. Because influence is very contextual, and it's very much centered around how is someone's influence as it pertains to your specific product category. And I tend to think step one, ask your customer-facing employees and ask your customers who are willing to give you their opinions, who do they rely on for information and who do they think are influential voices? Then step two, look at who do those people link back to and who do those people connect to. And step three, you can use some real technology solutions that don't just focus on a single number, but focus on getting you a much broader perspective look at a category specific. So my favorite example is it's not about if someone runs two different blogs, one about puppies and one about server virtualization. We don't really care how influential he is because he has the most interesting blog about puppies you could ever see. If his blog about server virtualization only has a couple of people who read it. And the inverse is also true. He can have a much smaller audience in a server virtualization blog than your average person who writes about puppies. But if those are the right people and the right target audience about server virtualization, he is one of your top influencers.
Great. Thanks a lot, Zach. Appreciate that. I got one more I have to ask because it's a great question. But Mark, for you, advocates don't always know what to say, but you don't want to spend time handing them the message so they feel like they're being indoctrinated. How do you do that balance where you let advocates have the freedom to do what they want, to say what they want, but at the same time try and give them the guidance that you're looking for on the message?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's one that we spent a lot of time trying to figure out here at Influitive with respect to our own product, because I think it's so true. I mean, people want to feel like they are completely in control, and they are, right? So oftentimes, like when in our advocate programs or our customers don't explicitly tell people what they say. They just say, hey, here's this opportunity, here's the way that this discussion board is going, or this is what the prospect, this is what their hot button items are. And you kind of gently say, well, here are a couple things to think about, right? But they still have free will, and absolutely do not tell them what to say or think. But one of the things that we found is that a lot of advocates really do want to have some coaching on how to be a better advocate. When we interview advocates, we ask them, so what is it that you really want from this advocating experience? One of the things that we hear a lot is, I want to be a better advocate. I take my role really seriously. And so I think providing some gentle coaching is a great thing. And often a really good advocate will actually proactively come back and say, how do you want me to spin this reference here? So that I'm most effective. How do I help you close this deal? Really, what kind of referrals are you really looking for? What kind of messaging do you want to get in those for those referral leads? So they'll actually ask you for that, but you can proactively give them some gentle coaching. In fact, we strongly encourage that as a best practice.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mark. Had to get that one addressed. It's such a great question. Okay, well, thank you very much, Zach and Mark, for answering those questions and for giving us a great presentation on the intersection of influence and advocacy. I think there was a lot of great takeaways and some great getting started tips for people out there that want to build their own advocate marketing program. We will make this presentation available as a recording if you want to share it with your colleagues, friends, family, your advocates. So look for that as a follow-up email. And again, any further questions you have that weren't answered, you can always just tweet it to us at Influid or at ZachRD or at #AdvocateMarketing. We'll get right back to you. So that's going to conclude our formal presentation and kind of bring us into this backstage pass part of the presentation. The idea here, backstage pass, is I attend a lot of webinars and I learn a lot of things, a lot of concepts, a lot of thought leadership, etc. Sometimes it's not the most obvious after the presentation and exactly what the company does. What does the vendor do that's sponsoring this great conversation? And so we thought we would just address that by allowing people that stay on the presentation to get a glimpse of the solutions that we provide to B2B marketers that are interested in building an advocate marketing program. So what I'm going to do is I'll take you backstage and I'll show you how we actually do it with our software, which is called Advocate Hub. So I'm going to jump out of my presentation mode here and into our software. So a couple of things to keep in mind. We talked about who your advocates are. We talked about what motivates them, and we talked about ways to identify them. Advocate Hub, which is our flagship product from Influitive, is essentially a portal that allows you to invite those top customers, those fans, those evangelists, sometimes partners, sometimes employees, invite them into a hub where it's very easy for a marketer to ask for help by presenting a challenge, and really fun and enjoyable and rewarding for your advocate to actually accept that challenge and go and do it. Think about it today, right? There are 100 different things you're asking of your customers. You ask them to review your products. You ask them to follow you on social media. You ask them to talk to analysts like Zach. You ask them to talk to media. They're in beta programs. They're in customer advisory boards. They speak at events. They join webinars. Ask, 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 ask. And typically, there's many different people throughout an organization that are making those asks. Advocate Hub essentially consolidates both those advocates into one place and the requests in one place. And so it allows advocates to kind of pick and choose the types of activities that they'd like to do. So how do we get those questions to them? Well, there's a couple of ways we do that. We can send out notifications when there's a challenge that we think is appropriate for a specific group or even individual advocates. We also send out something like this. What you're looking at on my screen is a digest that gets sent out on a weekly basis. And the digest essentially says, hey, Jim, this is the level you're at in this particular advocate program called Influitive VIP. It's the one we run for our business. Because you can see there's a number of challenges available to me, and each has a kind of score or point value associated with it. And we use things, like Mark said, some game mechanics, things like leaderboards to show where am I, like how active am I as an advocate, how much impact am I having, who's ahead of me, and who's behind me. For any of these challenges, I could click through. There's other ways you can get into Advocate Hub as well. We have a mobile application called Maven we just launched this week. But essentially, when I log into my hub, I then am presented with the challenge that interests me. So in this case, let's say it's a simple sharing challenge, right? We've posted up a blog post about today's topic of interest. And we want our advocates to share that blog post or comment on that blog post because that's part of our content strategy, is to kind of activate those advocates. So as an advocate, I've now logged into this hub, this exclusive group of advocates, and I'm presented with a challenge. It says, what's the difference between influencers and advocates? We're asking someone to actually retweet this particular blog post, and if I do, I get 200 points. Okay, there's a couple of ways we do that. We actually, as you can see here, we kind of load it up so we make it social sharing really easy to do. We can edit that if you want, but let's just say I tweet this. I can go ahead and share this on Twitter, which of course I'm not signed in. I can go ahead and share this link, but I won't bother trying to fumble through my password, which I forget every other week. And I can say, okay, I've shared this link, right? And when I do share the link, I'll be notified that, hey, I've gotten some points. Perhaps I've earned a badge or unlocked some new level as part of that activity. Okay. Now, when I do this particular challenge as an advocate, I'm brought back to what we call our dashboard, and the dashboard presents all these other challenges that are available for me. Okay. If I want to refer someone to the company, I can go ahead and do that. If I want to take a survey or provide a soundbite or a testimonial, I can do that. If I want to go review a product on one of the many product review sites that seem to pop up every week, I can do that as well. Okay, there's a number of ways I can navigate around in the Advocate Hub. This one's called VIP. Again, it's for our company. But each of these is essentially branded for the company that runs the Advocate program. So if I was an Ectron user, I would sign into not Influitive VIP, I would sign into the Ectron Inner Circle, which is branded in Ectron's colors and with their logo and everything else. A couple other things to note. This is me as an advocate. I'm at a certain level called fan. There are multiple levels. As I accomplish tasks, I take on progressively more difficult and more challenging things. I may move to evangelist. I may move to rock star. And by doing so, I may unlock a whole range of benefits and programs, some of which Mark provided examples in today's webinar, like I suddenly could get an executive sponsor assigned to my account, or I could get priority tech support, or I could get front row seating at the next annual user conference, complete with velvet ropes, if that's what the program says, right? So all types of benefits become available to you, and these are completely customizable from company to company. It also shows me my point total, shows badges that I've unlocked, and I have this notion of rewards. If you choose to run rewards where it says, hey, by X number of points, you can get an Amazon gift card, yes, you can do that. Or you can do things like, hey, we'll send you to Dreamforce, or we'll pay for your next certification level. Let's say you're an IT user or an advocate and you need to be certified with your, well, that's a great reward for people to unlock for their advocacy. Okay, so I'll just jump into one more and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But here's an example of one which is really high value. I cannot underestimate the value of product reviews, especially on independent sites like G2 Crowd. This is a new one. It's a great site for getting your product reviewed, all types of tools there to attract advocates and fans, or things like App Exchange or LinkedIn. These are all places where you can actually have your company and product endorsed by your customers. So in this case, again, I could go ahead and click and say, oh, well, take me over to G2 Crowd, and I'll see what it says here. This is G2 Crowd's site. Again, it's a really great tool. I can add stars. I can write my reviews. I could see other people's reviews if I want to do that. Here's an example of one of our advocates that's reviewed us recently, and I can complete this particular challenge. And when I've completed it, I simply say I submitted it, and now someone, an admin on the back end, may go ahead and check to say, okay, did this person actually complete the review or not? May provide some feedback to the advocate. Again, we can have multiple stage challenges. So in this one, once I complete my review, I go and say, I thought it was great. If you wanted to collect that type of feedback, you could skip this if you wanted. I'm done. Another challenge completed. And hey, what do you know? I got a bunch more points, moved up on the leaderboard, and it looks like I earned my G2 badge, which I can proudly display on my profile. That, in a nutshell, is the platform that we provide to B2B marketers to get them to mobilize their fans and advocates and get them out marketing on their behalf. Every company worth its salt has these advocates. You may not be talking to them in an organized way, but they're out there. We all have our extranauts. How are you mobilizing them? How are you kind of directing them towards the most important campaign? That's essentially what we provide in a software tool. Now, what I've shown, of course, is the advocate-facing interactivity, the hub itself. There's a lot of details on the back end of this product, how you set up these challenges, how you create segments of advocates so that, say, one advocate who's a technical user may see completely different challenges from an executive advocate who may say speaking ops or talk to an analyst, whatever the case may be, right? So you can do all that type of sophisticated segmentation. I will also add that this is all integrated with Salesforce.com. If you're a Salesforce.com shop, it's easy to add people into the program from Salesforce. And all of these activities are tracked on the contact record. So you can build reports in Salesforce that show you the impact of your advocacy program. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. I will say if you're interested in learning more, of course, you can contact us or come back to our site. As part of our follow-up, we'll lay out a series of events over the course of the summer, which we're calling our Backstage Pass Tour, with tour dates, and we'll focus on different elements of our product. Things like how do you do reviews? How do you get awesome referral programs running? How do you get comprehensive product feedback through an advocacy program? And more. So we'll focus on different solutions that we provide to B2B organizations. And that's it. That is my Backstage Pass. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the presentation today. Any questions, you can tweet me at Jim C. Williams or at Influitive, and we'll get right back to you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.